She was 58, divorced, and had nothing left but a name on a deed to a place no one wanted. What she found there wasn't just a second chance. It was a legacy waiting to be claimed. If this sounds like the start of a long road, you're right. It was. Stick with me, and if you feel it, if you know what it's like to stand at a crossroads with no map, maybe hit that subscribe button. We all have a story about starting over, and this one is mine. The conference room smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and quiet desperation. It was a smell I'd come to associate with the end of things. On the other side of the polished mahogany table sat Richard, my husband of 35 years, looking like a stranger in a suit I'd bought him. His lawyer, a man with a smile as thin as a paper cut, slid a stack of documents toward me. My own lawyer, a young woman assigned by the court whose blazer was a little too tight at the shoulders, gave me a small, encouraging nod. Her name was Brenda, and she was trying her best, but we both knew this was a surrender, not a negotiation. I picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive-looking thing, the kind of pen Richard used to sign deals that built the life I was now being surgically removed from. My hand trembled, not from age, but from the sheer weight of the moment. Every signature was a final nail. I signed away the house, the car I drove, the joint savings accounts that were now startlingly empty, the future I had so meticulously planned. In return, I received my maiden name back, as if it were some sort of consolation prize, and a single court-ordered check for $5,000. For transition, Richard's lawyer had called it. It felt more like severance pay for a job I hadn't realized was temporary. I didn't look at Richard as I pushed the papers back across the table. I didn't want to see the relief on his face. I didn't want to see the woman half my age who was probably waiting for him in the lobby. I just stood up, my knees feeling like they might buckle. Brenda patted my arm. "It's over, Eleanor. You can start fresh now." Fresh. The word echoed in the sterile silence of my new apartment, a one-bedroom box on the third floor of a building that overlooked a parking lot. It was the kind of place people moved into when their lives had gone spectacularly wrong. The walls were thin, painted a shade of beige that I called institutional sadness for 2 weeks. I moved between the sagging couch and the lumpy bed, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my upstairs neighbors' arguments. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the edges of a story that had moved on without me. The $5,000 was shrinking at an alarming rate, a countdown timer to absolute zero. Then the letter came. It was in a long, cream-colored envelope, the kind that usually means bad news, a bill you forgot, or a summons. It was addressed to Eleanor Vance, a name I hadn't used in decades. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, Abernathy and Sons, attorneys at law, with an address in a town called Harmony Creek. I almost threw it away. What possible business could I have in a place I'd only ever seen on a faded road map? Curiosity, or maybe just the sheer boredom of my empty days, made me open it. The paper was thick, and the type was from a machine that still used a ribbon. The letter was short and to the point. It was from a Mr. James Abernathy, informing me that following the recent settlement of my paternal grandfather's estate, an event that had happened over 20 years ago, apparently stalled in some legal limbo, I was the sole inheritor of the property listed as Lot 7, Old Route 4, Harmony Creek. The property, he wrote in dry, legal prose, consisted of a single commercial structure and the land it occupied, formerly known as Vance's Feed and Seed. He noted that due to the construction of Interstate 81 a generation ago, which bypassed the town entirely, the property held negligible commercial value. The taxes, however, were current. The deed was enclosed. I slid the folded document out of the envelope. It was an old, brittle piece of paper, covered in looping script and official stamps. My name was there, typed neatly on a new line, Eleanor Vance. Grandfather Thomas. I hadn't seen him since I was a teenager. He was a quiet, stubborn man with hands like worn leather, who always smelled of sawdust and sweet grain. After my grandmother died, he'd retreated into himself, and we just drifted apart. My parents moved us to the city for a better job, and Harmony Creek became a place in a photograph, a sepia-toned memory. I hadn't even known he'd passed away. No one had told me. Vance's Feed and Seed. I closed my eyes and could almost see it. A long, Low building with a covered porch, bags of seeds stacked like sandbags against a flood, the chime of the bell over the door. It was a ghost of a memory, faint and indistinct. According to Mr. Abernathy, it was now my ghost, my inheritance, a worthless building on a forgotten road in the middle of nowhere. It was a joke, a bleak, cosmic punchline to the spectacular failure my life had become. I laughed, a dry, rusty sound in the quiet apartment. I had nothing, and now I had a little more of it. For 3 days, the deed sat on my kitchen counter, a silent accusation. I had $2,700 left. I had no job prospects. At 58, with my only work experience being raising a family and hosting dinner parties, I was as obsolete as the feed store itself. I could stay here and watch my money bleed away until I was evicted, or I could, what? Go look at my useless inheritance? It was a choice between 2 different kinds of endings. On the 4th day, I woke up before dawn. The argument upstairs had started early. I couldn't stand the beige walls for another second. I packed a single suitcase with the few clothes I owned, made a thermos of coffee, and took the deed from the counter. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't stay. I was going to see the ghost. I was going to Harmony Creek. Maybe, I thought as I turned the key in the ignition of my aging sedan, you had to go to the middle of nowhere to find a place to start again. The drive was a journey backward in time. The 6-lane interstate, with its glittering service stations and identical chain restaurants, was the world Richard and I had lived in. It was fast, efficient, and impersonal. After 2 hours, my GPS instructed me to exit onto a state highway. The road narrowed. The cars thinned out. The landscape softened into rolling hills and fields of corn, brown and brittle in the late autumn air. Another hour and another turn, this time onto a road with no number, just a sign that read Old Route 4. The pavement was cracked, with weeds growing in the fissures like stubborn green stitches. The road followed the contours of the land, dipping and rising with the hills, a slow, meandering path from a different era. I passed derelict barns, their roofs sagging like tired shoulders, and houses with boarded-up windows. This was a place that time and progress had left behind. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of kinship. I too had been left behind. Harmony Creek wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. A post office, a boarded-up diner with a faded sign promising the best pie in the county, and a handful of houses. And there, at the far end of the short main street, was the store. It was exactly as I remembered it, only smaller and infinitely sadder. The white paint had peeled away to reveal the weathered gray wood beneath. The tin roof was streaked with rust. The large windows in the front were opaque with years of dust, and the porch sagged on one end. A gust of wind rattled the sign, which hung from a single hinge, its painted letters barely visible. Vance's Fee and SD. I pulled my car onto the gravel lot, the tires crunching in the silence. I sat there for a long time, just looking at it. This was it, the sum total of my life's assets. A ruin. It was worse than I imagined. It was perfect. I got out of the car. The air was crisp and smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. My grandfather, I remembered, always kept a spare key under the big, flat rock to the left of the steps. I walked over, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. I pushed aside some weeds, and there it was. My fingers brushed against the cool, worn stone. I lifted it, and underneath, nestled in the dark soil, was a key. It was old and iron, coated in a fine layer of rust. Felt impossible. A small miracle left for me 40 years ago. The lock was stiff. I had to put my shoulder into the door, and it opened with a groan of protest, the sound of a tomb being unsealed. A wave of air, thick with the scent of dust, old paper, and the faint, sweet perfume of ancient grain, washed over me. I stepped inside. The interior was vast and dark, the only light coming from the filthy windows. Dust motes danced like fairies in the pale shafts of sunlight. The space was cavernous and empty, save for a long wooden counter that ran the length of one wall. Ghostly rectangles on the floor showed where shelves and stacks of feed bags had once stood. It was a place of echoes and absences. It was the emptiest place I had ever been, and yet, it felt more like mine than the sterile apartment or the house Richard now shared with someone else. In the back, behind the counter, was a small office. The door was ajar. Inside, a single wooden chair was pulled up to a massive roll-top desk. Everything was coated in the same thick blanket of dust. A calendar on the wall was turned to July, 1998, the year he must have died. He had just locked the door and walked away, or perhaps he had just never come back. The desk was the heart of the room, a great, dark beast of oak. I ran my hand over its curved top, my fingers leaving clean trails in the grime. I tried the handle. It was locked. Of course it was. I jiggled it, pulled at it, but it was solid. I looked around the office for a key, checking the dusty shelves, the empty filing cabinet, but found nothing. Frustration, hot and sharp, pricked at me. This felt like another dead end, another locked door in a life full of them. I went back to my car and popped the trunk. Tucked next to the spare tire was a small toolkit, a relic from a time when I believed in being prepared. I grabbed the tire iron, felt heavy and purposeful in my hand. Back in the office, I wedged the flat end of the iron into the seam of the roll top. I put my weight into it. The old wood groaned. I pushed harder, sweat beading on my forehead. There was a sharp crack, like a bone breaking, and the lock splintered. The roll top shuddered and then slid upward with a dry, rattling sound. I peered into the desk's dark interior. It was filled with cubbyholes and small drawers. Most were empty, containing only dust and desiccated insects. But in the center, taking up the main space, was a thick, leather-bound ledger and a stack of letters, tied with a piece of faded twine. My breath caught in my throat. I reached in, my hands trembling again, and carefully lifted the letters out. The twine crumbled to dust in my fingers. On the top envelope, in a spidery, elegant script I recognized instantly from the birthday cards he used to send, was my name, Eleanor. I sat down in the dusty chair, the wood creaking in protest. The light from the window was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the floor. I opened the first letter. The paper was brittle. The ink faded to a soft brown. It was dated a few months after I had married Richard. "My dearest Eleanor," it began. "I suppose this letter will never find you. I am not a man for words, and less of a man for postage stamps. But I find myself sitting here tonight, the store quiet around me, thinking of you. I saw the picture of your wedding in the paper your mother sent. You look like your grandmother. She always had that same light in her eyes, a light that could make a man believe in goodness. This Richard of yours, he looks like a man who knows his way around a bank. I hope he also knows his way around a heart. I hope he knows the value of the thing he holds. Your mother tells me you are happy. I pray that it is true. Happiness is a fragile crop, Eleanor. It needs the right soil, plenty of sun, and a strong hand to pull the weeds. The world your husband is building for you, the world of the city with its tall buildings and fast money, it is not my world. My world is this. It is the smell of the earth after a rain. It is the trust of a farmer who needs credit until his harvest comes in. It is the weight of a promise, kept. These things have a value that cannot be counted in a ledger. I worry that in your new life you will forget the soil you came from. Not this dusty little town, perhaps, but the principles, honesty, hard work, the quiet dignity of a day's labor. This store, this dusty old place, it is not much, but it is built on those things. It has never carried a debt. It has never turned a man away who was in honest need. It is a small anchor in a fast-moving river. I hope you never need an anchor, my girl. But I will keep this one here for you, just in case. I had to stop reading. A sob, thick and painful, tore its way out of my chest. I cried for the grandfather I had never truly known. I cried for the girl I had been, the one with light in her eyes. I cried for the 35 years I had spent building a life on sand, a life my grandfather had seen through from a single photograph. I put my head down on the dusty desk, and for the first time since the lawyer's office, I wept until there was nothing left. The next letter was dated 5 years later. Eleanor, it said, your son was born. A boy. Thomas after me. I confess, the news brought a tear to this old fool's eye. A new branch on the family tree. Your mother sent a picture. He has your eyes. I wanted to send a gift, something proper. But what do you send a boy who will have everything? The silver spoons and fancy blankets, he will have plenty of those. So I did something else. I bought the small parcel of land behind the store, the one with the creek running through it. It is his, in my mind, piece of earth. A place where a boy can get his boots muddy and learn the names of trees. Perhaps one day you will bring him here. Perhaps he will see it. I hope he grows up to be a man who is not afraid of a little mud on his boots. My son, Tom, was now 30, a lawyer in the city just like his father. He loved sailing and expensive cars. I don't think he had ever willingly touched mud in his life. The gift of the land, the creek, the trees. It had sat here, waiting, an unheard invitation. Another wave of grief washed over me. This one sharper, laced with regret. The choices we make, the paths we take, they have echoes we never hear until it's too late. I read through the night, letter after letter, a chronicle of a life I had missed. He wrote about the new interstate, how it had siphoned the life from the old route. He wrote about his friends passing away one by one. He wrote about his loneliness, a quiet, stoic admission between lines about the weather and the price of corn. The last letter was dated just a week before the calendar on the wall. My Eleanor, I am tired now. The doctor uses long words, but the short of it is, my time is running out. This store is all I have left to give you. I know it is nothing to you now. It is a relic, a memory. People will tell you to sell it for whatever you can get. A developer has been sniffing around. A man with a smile like a fox. He wants to buy up the whole road, pave it over. He does not see the creek, or the old oaks, or the good soil. He sees only square footage. Do not listen to him. There is a value here he cannot understand. The desk, the one your great-grandfather built from the oak that fell in the storm of 28. It has a false bottom, just like some men's promises. You were always a clever girl. You will know what to do. Whatever you choose, know that this old place was built with love. And love, my dear girl, is the only thing that lasts. Be well. Your loving grandfather, Thomas. I finished the last letter as the sun began to rise, painting the dusty windows in shades of pink and orange. The office was cold, and my body ached from sitting in the hard chair all night. But something inside me had shifted. The emptiness was still there, but it wasn't a void anymore. It was filled with my grandfather's words, with his quiet, steadfast love. He hadn't left me a ruin. He had left me a story, an anchor. The reality of my situation came crashing back with the full light of day. I had a story, yes, but I also had about $2,000 to my name and a building that was one stiff wind away from collapsing. The romance of the letters faded against the harsh glare of my poverty. I walked outside, into the crisp morning air, and saw it. A few lots down, hammered into the overgrown weeds of an empty field, was a large sign. In bold, corporate letters, it read, Future site of the Oakwood Logistics Hub. Inquiries. Oakwood Development Corporation. Below it was a phone number. The fox my grandfather had warned me about. They were still here, still sniffing around. On impulse, driven by a desperate, flickering hope for an easy way out, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number. A cheerful, professional voice answered on the second ring. I explained, haltingly, that I was the owner of the old Vance's feed and seed property. The man's voice, which I imagined belonged to someone young and ambitious in a crisp shirt, became instantly smoother, laced with a predatory sympathy. Ah, yes, the old feed store. A charming piece of local history, he said. We've been hoping to speak with the owner. We're consolidating the parcels along the old route for our new distribution center. A big project. Going to bring a lot of jobs to the area, he paused, letting the importance of it sink in. Look, I'll be frank. The structure itself is a liability. It'll have to be demolished. but we are prepared to make you a fair offer for the land, as is.
$22,000.
We can have the paperwork drawn up today.
$22,000.
It was more money than I had ever expected to see again in one place. It was a plane ticket somewhere warm. It was a security deposit on a better apartment. It was a buffer against the terror of utter destitution. It was a lifeline. All I had to do was sign another piece of paper, just like I had in the conference room. Sign it away. Let it be demolished. Let my grandfather's legacy be paved over for a logistics hub. My hand was shaking as I held the phone to my ear. I need to think about it, I stammered. Of course, the voice said, smooth as oil. But our offer is time-sensitive. We're moving quickly on this. I hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at the sign, then back at the sagging porch of the store.
$22,000.
It was so easy. The easier wrong answer. Have you ever been so close to giving up that the easiest wrong answer felt like a lifeline? Felt like the only sane choice in a world gone mad? I stood there, on that crumbling patch of gravel, with two ghosts whispering in my ear. One was my grandfather talking about anchors and promises. The other was Richard, talking about assets and liabilities. For 35 years I had listened to Richard. I went back inside the store. The air was still and sacred, like a church. I walked to the desk and laid my hand on the letters. I thought of my grandfather sitting here, night after night, writing to a granddaughter who never wrote back. I thought of him buying a piece of land for a great-grandson he would never meet. He had kept this place for me. He had held on to it through loneliness and the slow decay of his town, believing, against all evidence, that it had a value beyond money. I made my choice. I walked back to my car, not to pack up and leave, but to get the small bag of groceries I'd bought on the way into town. I found a broom in a back closet, its bristles stiff with age, and I started to sweep. The work was brutally physical. I swept away decades of dust and grime, the dirt so thick it came up in clouds, choking me. I filled garbage bag after garbage bag with old, forgotten trash. I found a bucket and a rag and started on the windows. It took hours of scrubbing to let the light in, but when it finally streamed through, clean and clear, it was like a benediction. I wasn't just cleaning a store. I was sweeping away the ghost of my old life. I was scrubbing away the feeling of helplessness. With every motion, every aching muscle, I was taking possession of this place, and of myself. That night, I didn't sleep in my car. I cleared a space on the floor of the office, laid down my coat and a blanket from the trunk, and slept there, in the heart of my inheritance. It was the best I had slept in months. The next morning, I drove to the address on Mr. Abernathy's letterhead. His office was a small, tidy brick building on the slightly more populated main street of the next town over. The man who greeted me was well into his 70s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He looked at me over the top of his spectacles. "Eleanor Vance," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face.
"I'm James Abernathy.
My father was your grandfather's lawyer. I remember you as a little girl with pigtails who was always trying to catch the barn cats." He ushered me into his office, which was lined with law books and smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. I told him everything: the divorce, the paltry settlement, the letter, the offer from Oakwood Development. He listened patiently, nodding, his hands steepled under his chin. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Oakwood," he said, the name leaving a sour taste in his mouth. "They've been at this for a couple of years, buying up the old family farms piece by piece. They offer just enough to tempt people who are already struggling. Your grandfather, Thomas, he was a smart man. A stubborn one, too." Mr. Abernathy pulled a thick file from a cabinet. "He foresaw this, back in the 90s. He knew this road would be a target for this kind of thing eventually." He opened the file. He did something rather remarkable. He went to the county tax office and, using the modest profits he'd saved over a lifetime, he prepaid the property taxes on the store, paid them all the way through the year 2050. I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What? He bought you time, Eleanor?" the old lawyer said, his eyes twinkling. He knew you might need it someday. He ensured that no matter what happened, the county could never take this place from you for non-payment. It's yours, free and clear, for another 30 years. It was another letter I had never received, a final act of protection from beyond the grave. The $20,000 from Oakwood suddenly seemed like an insult, a pittance offered in exchange for a treasure I was only just beginning to understand. I spent the next few weeks engaged in the slow, arduous process of resurrection. I used a chunk of my remaining money to have the electricity turned back on. The single bulb in the main room flickered to life, illuminating the vast space with a weak but steady glow. I bought paint and brushes. I spent days on a ladder, covering the stained, peeling walls with a clean, bright coat of white. The work was slow, my muscles screaming in protest each night. But every morning, I woke up on my makeshift bed on the office floor and felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in my entire adult life. Slowly, the town began to notice. An old pickup truck rumbled into the gravel lot one afternoon. The man who got out was stooped with age, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. "You must be Tommy Vance's granddaughter," he said, his voice raspy.
I'm Henry.
"Knew your granddad my whole life. Saw the lights on. Thought my eyes were playing tricks on me." I offered him the coffee I'd brewed on a small hot plate. He told me stories about my grandfather, about the days when this road was the lifeblood of the county. "He was a good man, your granddad," Henry said, staring into his cup. "He carried half the farmers in this valley on his books through the drought of '88. Never charged a dime of interest. Said a man's word was better than any bank note." A few days later, a younger woman stopped by. She had bright, curious eyes and dirt under her fingernails. Her name was Chloe, and she had recently bought a small, foreclosed farm down the road where she was raising goats and chickens. "I heard someone was fixing up the old feed store," she said, her voice full of hope. Are you going to open it again? I have to drive 40 miles to get proper organic feed. If you stocked it, I'd be your best customer." These small interactions were like seeds being planted in barren soil. The idea, which had been a vague, impossible dream, began to take root. Reopen the store. It was insane. I knew nothing about running a business. I had almost no money, but for the first time it didn't feel impossible. Felt like the only thing to do. It was my grandfather's final letter that led me to the last secret. The line about the desk, the one I had skimmed over in my grief-stricken haze, came back to me. A false bottom, just like some men's promises. I had been so focused on the letters, I had forgotten the riddle. That evening, after Henry and Chloe had gone, I went back to the desk. I ran my hands over every surface, knocking on the wood, listening for a hollow sound. I pulled out all the small drawers, feeling along the back of their cavities. Nothing. I sat on the floor, frustrated, and looked up at the underside of the main writing surface. And then I saw it. Not a seam, but a slight discoloration in the wood. A patch where the grain didn't quite match. It was under the far left side, almost impossible to see. I pressed on it. Nothing happened. I pushed. I pulled. Finally, I remembered the splintered lock I had broken. I found a small piece of the broken wood and used it to push into a tiny, almost invisible hole right at the edge of the discolored patch. There was a soft click. The wooden panel, about a foot square, dropped down on a small hinge. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached into the dark cavity. My fingers brushed against a thick, oilskin-wrapped parcel. I pulled it out. It was heavy, tied with the same kind of twine that had bound the letters. I carefully unwrapped it on the floor. It wasn't money. It was something far more valuable. Inside was a folder filled with documents. There were old deeds, property maps, and something called a water rights covenant. But the most important document was on top. It was a multi-page agreement, drafted in my grandfather's precise hand and formally recorded by Mr. Abernathy's father in 1979. It was titled the Harmony Creek Agricultural Cooperative Trust. I read it, my eyes widening with each paragraph. In the late 70s, a different development company had tried to do the exact same thing Oakwood was doing now: buy up the valley, control the water from the creek, and build a resort. My grandfather had seen it coming. He had gone to every single farmer along the old route, from Henry's father to the parents of the people who now owned Chloe's land. He had convinced them to pool their properties and their water rights into a single legal trust. The agreement stipulated that no single parcel could be sold to an outside developer without a unanimous vote from all members of the trust, and that the water rights were to be held in common forever. It was a legal firewall built of trust and foresight. The documents had been signed by a dozen farmers. Many of the names were faded, the families long gone, but the legal entity, the trust, was still intact. This was his true legacy. Not the store, the community. He had protected it. Just as I was absorbing the magnitude of what I was holding, the crunch of expensive tires on my gravel lot made me jump. A sleek, black SUV pulled up, and a man in a suit got out. He had the easy confidence of someone used to getting his way. It was the man from Oakwood, the voice on the phone. He walked toward the open door, a practiced, sympathetic smile on his face. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his eyes scanning the half-painted walls, the clean windows, the general state of orderly poverty. "I was in the area and thought I'd stop by. I hope you've had time to consider our generous offer." I stood up slowly, the oilskin folder in my hand. I felt a strange calm settle over me. I was no longer the frightened, desperate woman from the conference room. I was Thomas Vance's granddaughter. I said, my voice even, "and I'm afraid I have to decline." His smile tightened. "Mrs. Vance, let's be realistic. This property is worthless. We're offering you $20,000 as a courtesy. It's more than you'll ever get from anyone else. We have acquired almost every other property we need. You're the last holdout. Don't make this difficult." There was a new edge to his voice, a hint of the steel beneath the velvet. "Our plans include rezoning the entire corridor and consolidating the water rights from Harmony Creek. Your property and your compliance are part of that plan." I held up the folder. "I don't think you've heard of the Harmony Creek Agricultural Cooperative Trust, have you?" I said. The man's face went blank. "The what?" "It was established in 1979. I continued, my voice gaining strength. "It places this property, along with a dozen others up and down this road, into a protective land and water rights trust. According to this document, which is filed with the county, no parcel can be sold for commercial development without the unanimous consent of all trust members. And the water rights," I added, tapping the folder, "are held in common. They can't be sold off by anyone." I saw a flicker of disbelief, then panic, in his eyes. He had assumed he was dealing with a broke, isolated old woman. He had no idea he was fighting a ghost, a stubborn old man who had laid a legal trap for him 40 years ago. That's absurd," he stammered. "Some old, forgotten document." "It's not forgotten anymore," I said. "This store isn't for sale, and I have a feeling that once I have a chat with my neighbors like Henry and the new goat farmer down the road, you'll find that their properties aren't for sale either. You see, your company didn't buy up all the land. You just bought the land from the people who had forgotten they were part of a community." He stood there for a moment, his handsome face a mask of fury. He knew he was beaten. He had spent millions acquiring properties that were now legally useless for his purposes without my cooperation. He turned without another word, got into his expensive SUV, and sped away, kicking up a cloud of gravel dust. I stood in the doorway and watched him go. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the old, tired buildings of Harmony Creek. I was still poor. I was still alone. But I wasn't helpless. I had my grandfather's legacy in my hands, and for the first time in a very long time, I knew exactly what I had to do. Months have passed since that day. The sign for Vance's Feed and Seed hangs straight and proud, the letters freshly painted. The store is open. It's not a booming business. It never will be. But it's an anchor. Chloe is my best customer, just as she promised. Henry comes in for coffee every morning, and we sit on the porch, watching the slow rhythm of the day unfold. Other folks from the back roads, people who had been isolated, have started stopping by. We're rebuilding the trust, not just the legal one, but the human one. We are a community of holdouts, of people forgotten by the interstate. I look back at the woman I was in that lawyer's office, and I barely recognize her. I thought my life was over because I had lost a house, a husband, a bank account. I thought my worth was tied to those things. But my real inheritance wasn't this building. It was the choice it represented. The choice to dig in instead of selling out. The choice to rebuild instead of running away. My grandfather left me something far more valuable than money. He left me a purpose. He left me a home. Starting over at 58 felt like an ending. I thought the world had told me I was done, that I was worthless. But sometimes you have to lose everything you think you are to find out who you're truly meant to be. Sometimes you have to get off the interstate and take the old, broken road to find your way back to yourself. If you've ever had to find your own old route if you've ever had to start from scratch with nothing but a key to a place everyone else called worthless, I want you to share that story in the comments below. Your story matters. This community is for people who know what it's like to fight for a second chance. And if you want to see what this little community, builds next, make sure you subscribe. We're just getting started.